Welcome to The World This Week. This week, we saw who is behind the mystery explosion at the Parchin military complex in Iran. The Ebola death toll tops 4,000 as anxiety grows in Europe and the U.S. IS jihadists are getting closer to the Turkish border. The U.S. criticizes Erdogan's refusal to fight back. No decision in Brazil's presidential elections. Rousseff will face Navas in the second round. And after 20 years, Pink Floyd releases a new album without Roger Waters. We begin this week with the Ebola epidemic that has now left over 4,000 people dead, largely in West Africa where it began. But it continues, of course, to make waves in Europe and the U.S. where cases have been identified and airport screenings are being stepped up all the time. Public health officials, though, say the only way to really eliminate the virus is to defeat it inside West Africa. Dr. Cameron Bopp is a member of Doctors Without Borders who just returned from 1 month spent looking at the virus in Monrovia, Liberia. He joins me now from MSF headquarters in Paris.
Thanks, it's a pleasure.
So, Dr. Bopp, you just returned, as I mentioned, from a month with MSF in Liberia. What were some of your central observations?
I think, like many epidemics, one is struck by the paradox of an apparently normal-looking city where business is going along and kids are in the street playing, but then suddenly you come to a house that's being disinfected and a body removed. Or you come to a hospital that's been shut down or an Ebola treatment unit that's taking care of, hundreds of dying patients.
What surprised you the most?
I think that people have gotten the message fairly quickly. I think that the community sensitization and the public awareness campaign has been one of the more successful parts of the response. One cannot go anywhere without encountering hand washing stations with chlorine at the entrance to almost any business or public building. People who were once kissing each other 3 times on the cheek as part of any greeting are now doing elbow bumps and reminding each other not to touch. People maintain space a lot better, I think, even in a crowded environment.
Dr. Bopp, hospitals are, of course, a focal point of the situation. What is their status at this point in Liberia?
Well, unfortunately, the hospitals were the first sources of major contamination among public structures. So a combination, first, of people being inexperienced in Ebola, and secondly, not realizing that it was upon them, led to contamination of healthcare workers and patients, and an immediate response, sometimes formally, to shut down the facility, and other times informally by staff being too frightened to come back to work, has led to a virtual shutdown of all the major hospitals.
Looking for a moment at the bigger picture then, given the cases in the U.S. and now in Europe and Spain, what should be done outside Africa's borders in terms of awareness or prevention?
Well, as you say, I think this case demonstrates that people in the West should not have a false sense of assurance that it can't happen there, especially healthcare workers, institutions, doctors, and nurses. We live in a global world, and a global awareness is certainly necessary.
Dr. Bopp, I imagine 1 month in Liberia was not simple, to say the least. Did any moment stick with you from this trip the most?
Yeah, the day that I learned that the Deputy Minister of Health, Dr. Bernice Don, who is to me one of the heroes of this epidemic for keeping such a level head and providing such guidance in trying to restore the healthcare system. Her deputy became infected, and Dr. Don was a contact and put herself into isolation. Her deputy died that night. And at the meeting I went to, where it was explained why Dr. Don was not going to be present that day, I think it hit me with an emotional impact I hadn't felt before.
Very important work you're doing, obviously involving a big degree of sacrifice. Dr. Cameron Bopp, thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
Earlier this month, the Swedish Prime Minister, in his inaugural address, sparked a minor diplomatic firestorm when he stated his country would recognize the state of Palestine. It prompted the ambassador to be summoned to the Israeli Foreign Ministry. This unilateral path to statehood is one that Israel, along with the U.S., has sharply opposed versus one through negotiations. With me now on set is former Israeli ambassador to Sweden, Mr. Tzvi Mazel. Ambassador Mazel, thank you very much for being with me. First of all, after the summoning to the embassy, to the foreign ministry rather, there was a little bit of backtracking on Sweden's part. How likely is it? Will they or won't they recognize a Palestinian state?
You cannot change the decision because it's a decision that is connected to their ideology, how to look at the third world and how to look on the Israeli-Arab conflict. But maybe because of all the noise that came out, that emerged, they will postpone it a little bit. Also, one should understand that they are breaking now the unanimity of the European Union not to recognize Palestine as a state now. Maybe in the future everything is possible. As everybody knows, Sweden is completely open to immigration, especially from Arab countries. And as I understand, now they have a population of Muslim minority about 800,000 people. It's about 8 or 7% of the population. It's very, very important, you see. And it's enough
so
that...
does this Muslim immigration, this population, you think, influence the policy?
Yes, I think
policy?
so, absolutely. Once they've decided to open completely the immigration into Sweden, they let themselves under pressure on the long run. Because at the beginning it was a few thousands, a few dozens of thousands. Okay, they can absorb it. But now things are completely different because it's a very important minority, And as we can see in many other countries, there is a lot of incitement against the West, against Sweden itself, and against Israel certainly. And they are taken in it. They cannot stop. What happened? I mean, there are two causes for this story. As I can. First of all, let us start with the current issue. The current issue that the social democracy, the left, has won the election. It's a fact, but not enough. They got not more. The Social Democrat Party got not more than 36 or 37%.
It's a new government with the same policy, you believe?
Yeah, it's the same policy of the social democracy, and I'll speak about it later. But what is important, they have not got the majority. Stefan Löfven, the new prime minister, has formed a minority government. He does not have the majority, so he does not represent the people of Sweden. And he needs from the outside kind of a support, and it can come only from the Muslim minority. This explains why he did it immediately when he opened in his inaugural speech.
Why he addressed this issue.
Yes,
I want to return.
Yes, please.
Well, I'd like to get to this issue of immigration on a larger scale for a moment, but before then, you mentioned the European Union. Sweden could, of course, set an important precedent as the first major country of the European Union if they are to go ahead and recognize the state. Just that the UK, the British Parliament, is set to vote on it this week. How big of a precedent could they set in terms of the EU?
As I said at the beginning, Sweden is not a really Western European country. Sweden defines itself as a non-aligned country. Since the 70s, when Olof Palme, the late prime minister, was later assassinated, they decided that they are non-aligned, and at that time, even closer to the Soviet Union. You see, so it goes back to its history. So I don't think that in the short run it will really affect European countries of the European Union. But on the long run, everything is possible because our situation in Europe is not the best.
So I know you have more to say about the sort of roots of this.
I think Sweden is a country of unanimity. They do all together. They speak among themselves, yes, and they decide upon a certain policy, and then they accept it together. There is no real debate.
Dissent?
It's not real debate in the press. When you look at the Swedish press, the four big national papers, Dagens Nyheter, Aftonbladet, Expressen, Svenska Dagbladet, they write all the same thing about the Arab issue, because the Swedes, right and left, have decided upon a certain policy. The roots of all this comes from long history. The main history of Sweden was facing the East. They had, since the 16th, 17th centuries, a lot of wars with Russia. They occupied part of Russia, of Germany, of Poland. This was the problem. But in 1812 to 1813, when Bernadotte became the king, they stopped the war. So in the last 200 years, they have not had any war. And they have decided they are going to solve all problems in Europe, certainly, but everywhere, only by dialogue and diplomacy. But it's not good for the Middle East.
It's a bit naive, you think?
It's a lot of naivety, absolutely, because we have a problem here of a different civilization, of Arab Islamic civilization, completely different. We have here religion, you have hatred, you have hostility against the Jews in Islam, and we are the only country facing them, and we don't have the sympathy of Sweden, not because we are not democratic, because they think that we employ force against the Arabs while we are being attacked. So that's why in the beginning of the 70s, Prime Minister Olof Palme, that I mentioned before, took Sweden from the Western camp, let us say, and put it into the non-aligned officially, close to the Soviet Union. It made the United States very angry at that time, but Sweden has remained a kind of non-aligned country, not completely connected to the West, even though it joined the European Union, but only in 1995, and so far it had not joined the Eurobloc. So it means there is a problem of civilization, of ideology with Sweden, which is completely different. This explains in depth the problem with us now.
Right. Very important to understand the roots, the actual roots of the influence of policy and so on for Israel and other nations and in Europe, across Europe in general. Ambassador Tzvi Mazel, thank you very much for being with me.
You're welcome.
And now to something a bit lighter, perhaps to inspire some of us to be a bit less lazy. This weekend, a group of Israeli swimmers broke the Guinness World Record, swimming 380 kilometers from Cyprus to the Israeli coast. Oded Rahav is one of them, and he joins me now after their success. Oded, thanks very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So first of all, congratulations, of course. How do you feel?
Well, actually, I feel great. I feel tired. But I'm really happy that we made it.
Oded, as you've mentioned, you've attempted this record once before. What made you guys attempt this goal in the first place?
We are diehards. We just, we said we will go for it until we achieve it. That's the whole thing about this kind of sport. You go for this goal, and once you achieve it, you try to reach another goal. So this one was the goal, and eventually, after a few months of practicing and trying to maintain proper training, we made it.
So we're talking about 6 guys. Tell me a little bit about the swim itself, how it's done.
Okay, it's a relay swim, 6 swimmers. One is swimming for an hour. Each swimmer actually swims an hour. One is like watching him from the boat. Another one is trying to rest, and another one just came off from the sea to the boat. 3 others are trying to rest. You're resting on a boat. It's like this, and every 5 hours you jump back into the water, and so on for 5.3 consecutive days, day and night, of course, as a relay goes.
Oded, I understand there were some rough seas, some hard moments. What is the hardest moment you remember during the swim?
There were tides, there were waves. Actually, in the first day and the 5th day, there were really high waves, about 2.5 meters. Winds, northwest winds. But the night itself is a challenge. You have to jump in the water, 21 degrees centigrade near Cyprus. Not an easy task. You don't really have time to rest. Whenever you rest, there's something going on. You want to eat, and you want to cool down.
So I have to understand what kind of training you guys are going through to do this. What is your preparation like?
During the last 6-7 months, we trained in the sea about 25 to 35 kilometers a week, day and night, just training as long as we could, as long as we can, and that was for the last 5 months.
Oded, you can probably teach us a thing or two about overcoming fear. How do you guys overcome fear?
That's a good question. Actually, fear is not in in our mindset. Like, we look at the sea, we decide if we can go for it. I think fear, all in all, fear is something that mankind should get rid of it.
Oded, thanks very much and congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
And this has been The World This Week. Find us here in the Jaffa Port next Sunday night for another edition. In the meantime, have a great week.